Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another Prevail Compliance Corner. I am Orly Burlov.
I am Noel Vestal.
And I am Marcy Womack.
All right. Marcy is our guest today. You are, I think, our third guest, Marcy. So we've learned to become better behaved as time goes on, because we realize we really scare off the guests, if we're not on our best behavior. I hope you won't take that too seriously, and you'll let us kind of let our hair down. I see your hair's in a braid, so you haven't let your hair down, but I let my hair down. And anyway, enough playing around. We should get started, because we have a really important topic, and more importantly, we have a very important guest, Marcy Womack from Shellman. Marcy, we know who you are. We know how much experience you have, but why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background and where you come from?
Sure. So thank you. I am Marcy Womack. I am a senior manager at Shellman. So we are a compliance, so we're an assessment firm. We perform a variety of services. Obviously, CMMC is one of those. So we are a C3PAO in the CMMC ecosystem. I am a provisional assessor.
One of the few C3PAOs.
Few and growing.
Growing number. It's growing.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's coming up. But yeah, it's not that many.
Exactly.
Anyway, I interrupted you.
No worries at all. So I'm also a CMMC provisional assessor and working on being a provisional instructor. I lead our CMMC practice and co-lead our FedRAMP practice and other federal services as well. So I've been involved in CMMC really since the start. So I'm really excited to hit these milestones that we're going to talk about today. So looking forward to that.
Well, great. So clearly Marcy knows her stuff. And we can't think of anyone better than Marcy to come on and to the show and talk about something that a lot of people have been talking about, and that is the voluntary assessments.
I've gotten so many questions from customers.
So many questions.
So many questions.
Yeah. So, I'll just kind of kick it off here. And then Noel, why don't you jump in and let me know where I miss anything, and then we'll kind of just go down the show notes. So voluntary assessments got announced at last week's town hall. Is it fair to say that was a bit of it wasn't a bomb, but it was kind of just a wake up call, right? They got announced, and were people expecting that?
Yeah, I don't know if people were expecting it at that point in time. There's been a lot of anticipation. Everyone's waiting for it. We knew that was the next milestone. And so I think it was exciting for the entire ecosystem and industry to say, hey, there's progress being made, because it is tough. There's so much happening behind the scenes that the public or even I don't always have the insight into. And so I think it was really exciting to say, CMMC is still relevant. It's still going forward. We still need to be focused on that. So I think that was a big takeaway from that announcement.
And yeah, especially, and just to kind of piggyback on that too, I mean, Marcy, I very much have the same experience where, I sort of got thrown into CMMC very, very close to the beginning, not, right at the beginning, but very close to it. So it's been years now for most people who've been sitting and waiting and going, okay, when can I do this? Okay, when can I do this? Okay, when can I do this? And they're being told, hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait. And it's been more than a year now that they've been waiting, okay, when can we do these voluntary assessments? So yeah, it was, I know that they came out with some information right before the meeting saying that they were going to talk about it. And everybody got really excited. Oh my gosh, are we actually going to get an answer? Is it going to happen? Is this the day? So yeah, you're absolutely right. There are so many people who are waiting on it. And it's a big deal to be able to finally say, yes, we can actually start doing this stuff.
I mean, and just a small note, the longer they were delaying it, people were beginning to think this isn't really going to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times on my compliance calls I have with potential customers and current customers. Oh, well, this isn't really that big of a deal anymore, right? I mean, this isn't something I have to worry about. Yeah, no, it is. It's definitely still something you have to worry about. So yeah, it's good that finally, and I'm sure for you guys at Shellman even better, now you can finally go, oh yes, now we can start doing assessments. What an amazing idea.
Totally. Yeah, we were ramping up and all of that. So now we can, everyone can have something to show for it once we kind of get those assessments going. So yeah, I mean, it's really exciting because everyone's, like you mentioned, has just been waiting.
Yeah. So why don't we just start it off here, Marcy, and why don't you give a little bit of text and some background. What are these voluntary assessments? What does the announcement mean for defense contractors and kind of for the ecosystem? Why don't you explain that to our audience.
Sure, happy to. So, with everything, especially CMMC related, it's nuanced. So, the voluntary assessment, I think there are a couple of distinctions I feel like are really important. One of them is that it's not technically a CMMC assessment or voluntary assessment. CMMC as a standard, I guess, does not technically exist until rulemaking is complete. So everyone talks about rulemaking, and it's kind of this behind the closet or behind closed doors thing that happens, and that's ongoing right now. So rulemaking for CMMC is expected to be completed mid next year, roughly. So what the voluntary program is intended to do is give organizations who are ready a path to get there ahead of time. So they are called joint surveillance voluntary assessments. And so what that means,
okay.
it's a mouthful. And what that means is we as a C3PAO are performing a NIST 800-171 DIBCAC high assessment against an organization.
Sorry, just to kind of throw an explainer in there, DIBCAC high assessments, just so everyone knows. You want to just explain that?
I can. So DIBCAC is an organization within DCMA. Forgive me, I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
It's part of the DoD. It's part of the DoD.
Maybe.
No, but just the fact that the high assessment
correct
means.
So historically, under some of the DFARS clauses, DoD would go to large primes or primes that had significant amounts of CUI or certain types of CUI, controlled and classified information, and they would perform an assessment on site of that organization, which is different from that organization performing their own self-assessment and submitting their score. And so what that's translating to is us as a C3PAO are then going to perform that type of assessment. It is not that much different than what we would do under a CMMC proper certification assessment. We are still following the same CMMC assessment procedures and NIST 800-171 assessment procedures, which are baked into each other essentially. And so that voluntary assessment really gives organizations a way to have something to show for it. So I think highlighting the fact that it is a 171 assessment, there will be DIBCAC, DoD personnel involved in that assessment is important to know. The second,
it'll be on site.
It will be. I think there is a path for some virtual assessment depending on the architecture of that organization. If they don't have any on-site components, let's say they're almost entirely cloud-based and there's no physical aspect to their environment per se that would be assessed, I think there's a path for virtual. Don't hold me to that. I'm not 100% sure. There's still some of that formalization being built out. There was a second thing that I think is important, and it has completely left my memory on what is important about voluntary assessments. Oh, I remember now. The path to CMMC certification. So what happens? You have this 171 assessment done. Does that mean you have to go through CMMC assessment again next year? The answer is hopefully not. DoD, through rulemaking, is intended to allow a path for those 171 DIBCAC high assessments to be converted to CMMC level 2 assessments once rulemaking is complete. And that is a standard or a certification that is allowed to be issued. So those are kind of the two distinctions with the program. I don't know if you want me to parse into any of those other details as well.
So let me just kind of bring it up a levels, right? So the main things that what the voluntary assessment means is that for those companies that are kind of almost ready or feel like they're ready, this is an opportunity for them to be assessed against the NIST 800-171 standard. It's not fully CMMC yet, but it will be. Second, and here's where I might ask you to kind of just clarify, will it be just looking at NIST? Will it be looking at DFARS as well, C through G and FedRAMP? Would those be part of it as well?
The FedRAMP discussion will be somewhat separate. That is ongoing in terms of what reciprocity or any derivation of that means in the CMMC or 171 discussion. So when we think about, and I know that later in the discussion, we're going to touch on that too, like what orgs can be doing. If you're using a cloud service provider, look at the customer responsibility matrix and be able to account for what is your organization's responsibility with regard to those controls. So the cloud discussion is handled on really an ad hoc basis as it relates to that organization.
And what about the specific the 70-12? So I'm assuming, and please tell me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming sort of the rulemaking they're leaning on to do these is the the 70, the DFAR 7012 clause stating the 800 171.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean then also paragraph C through G are going to be evaluated too? Because I know that's obviously a big area for a lot of people.
It is. You're exactly right. And to be honest, I'm a little unclear on that, on what us as a C3PAO would be doing, or if that is, part of that joint surveillance is the DIBCAC team also being involved. Perhaps they are performing the evaluation of those secondary components within DFAR 7012.
Well, and I know you and I have talked before, so I know you haven't had the first one yet. Really answer those questions yet, probably.
We will know, but not right now.
We'll just have to have you back afterwards, and you'll have to give us the overview of the assessment.
Yes. All right. So it means that if you're just to kind of summarize, the voluntary assessment announcement means that if you feel like you're at a high level in terms of your ability to meet the NIST 800 171 assessment requirements, you can put yourself forward. You can contact someone like Shellman or any of the other C3PAOs out there and volunteer, so to speak, to be assessed. And these will be mostly will be at your office, or I'm sorry, not Shellman's office, but will be on premise. And they will be, we're still looking at whether that's going to include a review of C through G and FedRAMP, but we do know that those defense contractors are going to be required to meet those. So whether it's assisted this time or later,
you probably should just do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I feel like we've already gotten into a little bit of this next question, but let's, why don't we kick it off? So how are those voluntary assessments going to work? We know they'll be on premise, but let's kind of run through it a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess a lot of the questions we get is like, how do we go about this? Like how do we start? And Orly, you kind of walked us into that, is first contact a C3PAO, Shellman, or any of the others that are authorized in the ecosystem. And from there, we loosely follow the guidance that's provided in the draft CAP, the CMMC assessment process. And what your C3PAO will likely do is perform a readiness assessment, like a phase 1 readiness assessment, to make sure that all of your ducks, all the organization's ducks are in a row to actually go through that assessment. And then from there, we as a C3PAO will submit tentative dates, and your organization, the dates that you want for that phase 2 kind of main assessment component to be performed. And we submit that to the AB, who then coordinates with DCMA DIBCAC team to ensure that they can also support that timeframe, because again, joint surveillance assessment. And so from there, then that timing is finalized. So that's kind of, the tactical, how we get from, hey, I want to be assessed, to actually being assessed.
And so, let's say everything goes well, everyone's ducks are in a row and they get a high score, not quite high enough. Would they, not at the perfect score, would they then go and create POAMs for the ones that they don't meet and set up a day for reassessment?
They would.
Are you going to be following, Marcy? I know in the CAP, you mentioned this. Are you going to be following that guidance, the POAM related guidance that's there? Because I know this is a little bit different since it's not, officially a CMMC evaluation. So the CAP isn't technically, I know that's why you said you're loosely following it, because it's pre-decisional for one. And then for two, you're not technically doing a CMMC assessment. So is it going to sort of go kind of fall? I know that in just a review of that section of the CAP, just for our audience, it states that you have, you can't have the ones that are deemed too high scoring, right? Those cannot be POAMs. And then whatever POAMs you do have on those lower, and I believe they list like 23 or so that you could POAM that are, considered. There you go. See, exactly. See, I knew it. So is that sort of the direction you're going to follow as well, as sort of follow along as much as possible with the CAP? And then is that also a sort of secondary to that question, is that still going to go with that 180-day cycle for POAM review?
So I'm going to answer the second one first, because
sure.
I don't know.
Okay.
Our expectation is that a lot of this is going to be the first assessments, I think, are going to serve as a little bit of a feedback loop to DIBCAC and DOD and the AB, and say, like, here are the outcomes of this assessment. Here's how we can improve this process.
The lessons learned kind of situation.
Exactly. And some of this we and the entire ecosystem won't know until we've tried it. And so that's part of being on the cutting edge. It's an uncomfortable place to be for me. I love knowing what to expect going in, but there's only so much we can do on that right now. So I don't know about the POAMs. So I know that as a result of these assessments, you're going to have a DIPCAC. You're going to have your scoring based on those 110 requirements. For those items that are essentially can or cannot be POAMable, the expectation would be that organizations do create a POAM and obviously make sure that they remediate any of those deficiencies. But how that remediation is validated is unclear to me. So I'm not 100% on that.
No, that makes sense. No, that's totally reasonable.
Yeah. And I think I forgot the first part of your question. So let's circle back to it.
No, it's okay. I was just wondering if you were going to sort of, and you may not know the answer to this question yet either. Like you said, since we stated earlier, you haven't actually done one of these yet. So yeah, again, maybe this is an opportunity for you to come back and, give us sort of an overview of some of the lessons learned, when you have those experiences. But the other question that I had was more, is the CAP going to be followed, even though it's pre-decisional and even though it's specifically CMMC? But like you pointed out, there's so much crossover between the two. I wasn't sure if they were going to sort of lean at least a little bit on the CAP, or maybe not.
I think so. Yeah. When we think about making sure organizations are ready, that's really phase one, like that readiness assessment. We'll have a security assessment plan in place in most cases. There are a few of the DIPCAC templates that we'll use. So yeah, I do think the CAP in terms of like assessment structure will be followed. Some of the specifics unclear to me, but I think it's a good guide for organizations to at least kind of understand where C3POs are coming from with regard to the workflow of the assessment and those types of things.
Let me just ask a quick question. Would it be possible that a company, defense contractor comes to Shellman and says, we'd like to be assessed, and you take a pre-assessment of them and you say, you guys aren't ready, come back tomorrow or something type thing?
Yeah, I think that we will see that. We haven't to date, but I think that we will. And that is baked into the process, into the CAP process. So, and in those instances, we would say, hey, it doesn't look like you're ready. Here are the reasons why, or here's what we observed. Let us know when you feel like you have a good handle on this, and come back and we'll do another pass and another readiness assessment. And I use readiness assessment loosely. It's really like a review. And then if they're good at that point in time, then they'll move forward to that phase 2 testing. There is one piece of this that I think I failed to mention. I don't have a lot of insight into, we submit a list of organizations who desire to be assessed on X date to the DCMA team. I don't know entirely what their criteria is for scheduling or prioritizing.
Does anyone?
Of those organizations. I've heard like some things that are tossed around, but nothing, it's all a closed door to me.
It is. Yeah.
I fully expect that there are organizations that will be selected based on that criteria and others that won't. So I don't know that it's a given that if you go through this assessment that you would, or this process, that you would be selected. I hope that's the case because there are so many organizations that are interested and are ready.
Right. But let's not overestimate. I think it might be safe to say the majority, in my majority, I say, whether you say a simple majority or otherwise, are not ready. But that leads us kind of to our third question and our third point of our discussion, which is what can defense contractors do to get ready for these voluntary assessments? You take your typical company, and you know this much better than I do, that is not quite ready, but seen the light, so to speak, and sees that voluntary assessments are just the first step in the domino, and that they are going to need to get themselves ready. So how do you have that conversation with defense contractors? What do you tell them?
Yeah, it's an uphill climb, depending on where they're starting from. When people climb 14ers here in Colorado, they're like, oh, when you start at 10,000 feet, it's a little bit different, starting at sea level. But I think
I'm in Boston. We're at sea level.
I grew up almost at sea level, so I struggle in Colorado. Let me tell you.
I'm from Florida. I'm like below sea level, so
we're in good company here. I think one, knowing your CUI, like knowing where your CUI comes in, what you're doing with it, identify that, create data flows. It seems so simplistic, but I don't think that can be underestimated. Is knowing what CUI you have, how it's being handled, processed, stored in your systems, what happens to it. That might involve, coordinating a bunch of different business units or different personnel within your organization, and I think that's the first thing. I think in terms of truly, once you have an idea of your environment and what would be in scope, two things. One, don't underestimate that CMMC scoping guidance, where it identifies identifies and categorizes the different types of assets that may be affected by a CMMC assessment. So when we think about those systems that definitely handle CUI, those are CUI assets. If we think about maybe you have an identity management system that's not necessarily handling CUI, but it provides security controls and protection capabilities for those CUI assets,
right.
that is a security protection asset. Those things are very, very important.
We did a video a couple of weeks ago on that.
And one of the things I wanted to mention too, and it's something that trips up, I know I've had a lot of these conversations with our customers and potential customers. You know, it's not just transmitting CUI and it's not just storing, it's processing. That's the word that I think a lot of people get tripped up on, you know, is because it is kind of a sort of all-encompassing catch-all word, right? Mm-hmm. What is considered processing CUI, you know? So I completely agree with you that scoping guide is really important to sort of narrow down those things. And what you said, spot on. Where is your CUI at? I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations, and I'm sure you have too, where it's like, well, I have CUI everywhere. Oh, okay. Well, but
it's going to be a tough process.
This is going to take a lot longer now, which is another thing that we've talked about a lot here on Compliance Corner is the scoping down, you know, making sure that you have your CUI in a centralized location as much as you can so that you can scope. And, you know, my favorite is, okay, well, how many users, you know, have to access CUI? Well, I guess everyone in the company, that's like 500 people. Are you really sure that all 500 people have to look at all the CUI all the time? Maybe that's true. And maybe they do. I mean, that's possible, but it's likely that that's probably not the case too. So do you think that that's another thing that a lot of people can do to sort of get ready for voluntary assessment is more of scoping down of just the whole program entirely?
Entirely, for sure. And that's a part of just like I hope that some of the outcomes of identifying your CUI and thinking about those data flows and like actually having a diagram and mapping it out, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much larger than what I thought it would be, what it needs to be. And an outcome of that is let's see what we can pare down. Let's see what we can reduce.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah. There's one other thing I think is really important here. And so my background is audit. I'm an assessor. That is, I love it. I breathe it and I'm really nerdy about it and I own it. But I think that something that is overlooked is 171A, the standard 171A, and the CMMC assessment procedures. So someone will go and look at the control. Let's take like 311, where it's like, here's the basic access control requirement. Have you identified? And do you require, you know, access authorization and identification authorization? All those keywords. There are like 6 assessment objectives associated with that single sentence and that single statement. And it is pretty complex. And so I think that if organizations are gauging their own readiness and they're looking introspectively saying, hey, are we good? Do we have the documentation we need? Can we answer these questions? You have the answer to the test. Look at the assessment objectives. And if you cannot answer them, your assessor won't be able to either. And so we have to go through and look at each one of those. And if there are some gaps or holes or deficiencies in any of those objectives, that's a potential not met for that entire control.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's something too that I know I don't even know how many times I look at the assessor's guide I don't even know how many times I look at it. Yeah. And that's something that I've been very impressed with CMMC on their assessor's guide. Really does, if you are starting out with this and you're really not sure on a control, there are examples in there. There is further discussion in there. There's, hey, this is what people are going to look for. Here are some questions. I'll even go beyond the objectives. And at the bottom, usually they have, here are some questions assessors are going to ask themselves.
Yeah, like the considerations.
Yep, the considerations. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really does go very in depth in a lot of those things, and you can get a lot of clarity. I think not for all of them, obviously, but for a lot of them, you can get at least some direction to go. I think that's, there's no way we could overstate enough, I think, how important it is to have access to that.
Totally. Yeah. And I think I said last thing last time. This is my last point. My favorite control families are AC and IA. And so I focus on, and I feel like access paths are really important. So thinking of, if you've got your system, if you think of like their boundary as a bubble and all the ways that things are poking in or poking out of that bubble. And maybe you have operators that access your system in a certain way, administrators, and maybe you have a front-end web application that's handling CUI or processing that, or maybe serves that back to your customer. Thinking of how your customers access that as well. So thinking about access paths, and each of the AC and IA requirements, for the most part, or controls, are going to apply to every access path. So there may be a multi-pronged answer for a single objective or a single control within those families. And I think that can be overlooked sometimes as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head for not even just AC and IA, but there's so many of them that interconnect with each other. It's outstanding. Right. And I think you're 100% right. If you can get that path of where access is coming in, where access is coming out, yeah, you have a way better opportunity to find those overlapping different controls. I think this actually probably addresses, this one and this one. And and which can also make it easier for you, because then you know where everything is. It really is all about making a good plan that is something that you can execute on. It's not too overwhelming, but it's also not too simple, which is, that perfect balance.
Tough to find.
Goldilocks.
Exactly.
I mean, I know we could go on and talk to Marcy for a couple more hours on this topic because there's so much to dig into, but I think we're just about out of time on today's Compliance Corner. Marcy, let's make a date to have you back once you've done your first couple of voluntary assessments. I'm sure you'll be a gold mine of information then.
Absolutely. We would love to have you back.
I would love to. That sounds great.
And Marcy, if people have questions, how can they reach out to you or Shellman?
Absolutely. So our website, we do have a contact form on our website that gets routed to me and any of our other SMEs. So if you have questions, you're ready for assessment, you want to get in the queue, all the above, that's the best way to do that.
And we'll put your website address in the show notes.
Thank you.
And tell people if they have questions to reach out to you, because you are a font of information.
Definitely.
All right. I think we've gotten to the end of another Compliance Corner. Thank you, Noel. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you, Orly.
Yes, thanks for having me. Lovely conversation.
It's been a pleasure.